Okay, so let's actually start. We'll build a simple React application that'll do basically a CRUD application for inserting, updating, and deleting users. Um, Fairly simplistic, but let's start with this one. Again, I've got an empty directory here. I'm going to say npm init. I'm going to do the yes flag, which basically just gives you the defaults. And let's go in here and just install a couple things. I want to focus here on just doing the back end. So we'll start with that. So let's just install Express. And we'll save. And there's a couple of other ones that I need. I'm going to need Lodash. I'm also going to need body parser. So we'll save this. And let's get set up. And we'll, again, since we're operating on the server, we're going to be able to just use ES6 stuff pretty easily. Let's go over here and we'll add our server JS file. And just to sort of get started, we could also go over here. Eventually, we'll bring in all of our React stuff. But for the moment, we're just going to do a start dev. And I'm just going to say nodemon server.js. Eventually, we'll put some other settings in here once we get into the React part of this. So in terms of our server, we're just going to bring in Express by requiring it. And this is going to be an incredibly simplistic backend. We could always end up adding a database to this later on. Let's also bring in Lodash, which is just a module that's going to make it easier to deal with collections. So Lodash, and we bring that in as an underscore because it was an offshoot of underscore. And we'll also end up bringing in our path, require path. So a couple of things that we're going to want to do here. One of them is we're going to have an app. And this is basically going to be our Express app. Make this a little bit bigger. There's not going to be all that much code here, which we're really going to use. A couple of static routes that I would like to have here. I'm going to say app.use, and this is going to be when things end up getting compiled for our React, when we end up using Webpack, we're going to need to access this directory. So here I'm going to say express.static, directory name, and this is going to be dist. And we could actually take this, and we're also going to need to get some files from our node modules folder. I'm going to call that vendor, and we'll say node modules. Another couple of things that we're going to want to do here is that we're going to want to use our body parser. So here we'll just actually require our body parser. And we're going to get the JSON middleware because we're going to be sending JSON data back and forth from our application. The only other thing that we'll end up doing here is let's set up our main route. So we'll say request, response, and here we'll just say response, send file, path.join, directory name, and we'll say index.html. And sort of standard, make sure I got that right. One more. And we'll have to listen on a port. So we'll say constant port equals process, environment, port. Again, this is for deployment purposes, or if we wanted to control the port, or we'll say 3000. And we'll tell our app to listen on the port. And when it's listening, we'll just output a message, console.log. And again, just some ES6 stuff, listening on port. Close that off. 1, 2. And let's just do one other path here. I want to start testing out our API early on. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say we're going to have some constant users, which is going to be our sort of pretend backend. And we'll start setting up these, and this would be something like /API users, request, response. Again, make it simple. We're not going to use a database, so we'll say response.send, users. Okay? And if we have that running and we don't have any errors, we could say npm. Again, if you did npm run, you'll see all of your npm commands. We have some that are built in here. The one that we're going to do is npm run start dev. And so let's see, we've got our, so I think I probably have an issue here, and here I forgot my path.join. So when you say static, you basically have to give it a directory. And so I want to join these two paths to get the directory. This so it makes it a little bit easier for me, and I left that out. And if that runs again, that should be listening. And if I went over here, one of the things I could do is if I go over here, I'm going to open up just to test out our backend, which we'll do relatively quickly. Let's go over here, and I'm going to open up Postman. And if this is working, I should be able to go over here. And in fact, I have this up from before. If I do a send, I should go over here and realize that I don't have any users and I don't have any data. So there's a couple of paths that I want to set up. So in fact, if you're using something like Postman, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can do something like this and insert a new user. Again, Postman is nice to be able to test these routes out. Ideally, maybe you'd have some testing environment that you're using and you could document your code. But one of the key things here is that I want to specify that the data is coming across as application JSON. And that's how the middleware, or body parser, will know to basically take that string and parse it as JSON data. If I go to run this, it'll tell me that it can't post to that route. But let's go and set that up. That's a fairly easy route to set up. And what we're going to do here is we'll do an app.post using our RESTful route, API users, request, response. Here I'm going to put this on multiple lines. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say users.push. There's one more thing that I actually want to do here is that if I just did this, what I'm going to end up getting here, if I just said response.send request.body, okay? If I just did that, and now I went back, this is just a sort of middle thing I could do where I could send this, and I end up just getting this back. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that when I insert a user, the user also has an ID as well. So let's go back here, and one of the things that we could end up doing here is that when we go to post, we can actually use our underscore to say something like, so this could be, our user is going to be our request.body, and we want to add an ID. We want to do it by finding the max ID. So instead of using the reduce, we're going to use underscore, and we're going to say constant, and I'll say user with max ID. And one of the things that underscore allows me to do is to say, hey, look, give me the max by of my users, and I want to find the max ID. Now again, if there's no users that are in the system, this will end up giving me back a undefined value because there's no user that exists. And what I'll do over here, I'll say max ID. I'll say if we have a user with a max ID, then what we're going to do is we're going to use user with max ID and grab their ID. Otherwise, we're just going to say that our max ID is 0. And here we'll say user.id equals plus plus max ID. So if I just went back over here, we could test this out. But what we're really sort of looking at doing here is that another thing is that when you get used to the ES6 stuff, you can see generally we use constants. But if we feel like the data is going to end up getting changed, we end up using let. Okay? So if we go back over here and I try this, you'll see that I have an ID of 1. And I'll just keep on getting an ID of 1 because nothing's being added to my collection. But I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say users dot push user. So even though it's important to note, even though that my array users is a constant, I'm not reassigning something to that value. I'm basically just modifying that collection. And what I'll do is I'll send back this new user. So what should happen here is that first time Curly's got 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And if I went back here, I would see 4 users with the name Curly. Okay? So if we went back, went over here, we could actually try to test out a delete route by doing something like this. But of course, we don't have that route set up. So this is a fairly easy thing to set up. Again, with a database, you'd set this up differently. But here we're going to do an app.delete API users ID. And what we're going to end up doing here, we've got our request, our response. Again, putting this on 2 lines, I need those curly braces. And what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm just going to use underscores remove. And underscores remove is basically going to say, all right, I've got a collection of users. Which one do I want you to remove? And I'm going to say I want you to remove the one with the ID, request params.id. And just to be safe, since parameters always come in as strings, I'm just going to multiply it by 1. This should end up removing a user. And if I go over here, I'm just going to say response.send status 200, meaning that I was successful. So again, since every time I restart, I have a new array, I'm going to have to sort of go through this in order. Now I'm empty. Now I've got curly with an ID of 1. And if I go here to delete that user, I'll see that I deleted curly. And if I go back here, I'll see that I'm empty again. Okay? So now we can end up inserting. We could end up deleting. We could end up getting our list. Let's also talk about patching. So here, if you look here at the body, so I want to change this user with an ID of 1. Let's say his name was Curly. I want to change it to Curls. So right now, if I ended up doing this, I would find out that there is no patch that I could end up doing. So we'll go over here. And a patch is going to look similar to my delete. So I'll say app.patch/API users ID request response. And what I'm going to do up here is I'm actually going to find the user that I want to modify. And it's kind of similar to this one over here. I don't want to remove. What I want to say is the user that I want to find, and I'm going to say find based on this condition. Now I'm going to have my user, and I'm going to use underscore. One of the things that underscore does, and you've seen this with other frameworks as well, underscore allows you to easily merge objects together. Again, it's a question of just sort of looping over their keys, and you have one object, and if the properties change in the other object, you're basically overriding the properties. So what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to say underscore.merge, and I'm going to merge my user with whatever comes in to the body, and I'll just end up sending back my user. So what this should allow me to do is if I went through this whole process again, going over here, and I'll go and I will insert curly again. And let's just see, probably have an error here, missing initializer, and I have an error here. So this is going to be const user equals. That should run. And if I go back to my Postman and I go in here, I can post. I can do a get. I don't want to delete yet, but if I end up doing an update with a user of 1 with this information and I send it, and I come back here to my get, I can see that ended up updating.
How come you did patch?
Patch instead of update? You mean the, are we talking about?
I've just never seen patch.
Well, there's only two that we use. I don't think there's an app.update. I don't think that exists. The only other ones that we've used is app.put. So sometimes we use put, sometimes we use patch. There's some subtle difference between the two of them. I think patch might be where you're not actually updating all of the properties, and put might be that you're totally replacing it. There's some logic between them. I could be using patch and put wrong. Not really sure. But this would be enough to sort of get our back end set up. So it's probably not a bad time to commit.
Underscore with Lodash kind of replace underscore.
Lodash, Lodash was, I think the problem sometimes that you have is that people aren't maintaining these libraries, and so underscore was, ported over to Lodash, and Lodash seems to be a little bit more popular than underscore at this point. I'm going to go over here and say git init, and I'll go over here and I'll say git.add dot git.commit m first commit, and so now I've got my first commit. All right, let's take a break from this one so these videos don't get too long.